2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Don't Do That, the podcast where we talk about what not to do at work and beyond.
As equity practitioners, we found ourselves often thinking that folks should stop doing things before they start doing things. Hence the title of our podcast, Don't Do That. I'm Ani. I'm an equity coach, organizational equity strategist, and educator with a deep curiosity for how to improve systems and a commitment to lift others as I continue to learn and grow.
I'm Karen, and I've worked in social justice for over a decade. I'm a consultant, coach, and thought partner. My purpose is to make community matter. I do that by helping leaders create better work environments. Adi and I met as consultants and quickly became friends. Collectively, we have over 25 years of experience navigating equity, inclusion, and justice in the workplace. Don't Do That is a platform to tell stories about making mistakes at work and how to fix them. The views on this podcast are our own. We do not speak on behalf of our organizations or the communities we mention.
So welcome listeners to the Don't Do That podcast. Today on the pod, we are discussing the blurry line between social media and the workplace. So as professionals, we continue to think about the balance between building this professional brand and oversharing. And today we want to unpack the ways you should and should not use social platforms. We've seen folks use social platforms to increase the visibility of their work, build deep community and connection even across borders, elevate awareness, and shine a spotlight on their organizations. But we've also seen people lose opportunities, erode trust, or unintentionally create deep risk for their organization or for their work. So today we want to talk about how to do it well and where we should think about really upping our boundaries. One disclaimer before we dig in, today's topic is really about the culture of social media, and we're not specifically discussing this topic from a strictly communications perspective. So I wanted to name that. So today we have a guest on our pod. We're so excited. My dear friend, Arnold Ford, who is a vice principal at a charter elementary school in Philadelphia and a micro influencer in the education space. For context, Arnold and I have been friends for over 20 years. We were friends as undergraduate students in Philadelphia. And I won't get into the specifics of how he and I know one another or how we met. That's another story for another day.
Not for social media.
Not for social media. No, definitely not for LinkedIn, for sure. But what I will say is Arnold has always been a phenomenal storyteller. I think he is someone who has always been able to build community through his words, through storytelling. So it is unsurprising to me that he is in the space that he's in education, and both as a micro influencer in the education space as well. So Arnold, we're going to pass the mic to you. Please introduce yourself. We ask our guests to introduce themselves with a fun fact or something about you that doesn't appear on your resume, so we can get to know how you sort of think about your work.
So thank you so much, Ani and Karen. I'm really excited to be here and to share in this space. Like Ani said, my name is Arnold Ford. I am a vice principal here, and I just say educator. I'm an educator here in Philadelphia and have been for the better part of more than 15 years at this point, which does not seem real, but it is what it is. And
Yes.
Ani and I are very good friends. I say all the time, and I say it, even when she's not listening, Ani taught me how to be a friend.
Oh.
So I appreciate her for that eternally. When I think about who I am and how it contributes to how I show up, the first thing that comes to my mind is I'm a preacher's kid. And I
Mm.
think that part of my identity, um, it's really layered because being a preacher's kid, I'm always hyper aware of perception, even if that
Mm.
perception doesn't necessarily align with like the truth of my being. Like
Yeah.
perception is always at the forefront of how I think and how I show up. So I think that that's important as an educator because I always say I don't have the luxury of projecting my bad days onto students because
Mm.
one moment can really change the trajectory of a child's year. Like,
Mhm.
one off color comment or moment, or, you know what I'm saying? It can really just change things because kids remember things. Even us, we remember things that our teachers may have said to us on this one random
Mhm.
day. And I think that's an awesome responsibility and it's heavy, But I think that being a preacher's kid and always being hyper aware of perception has
Yeah.
kind of helped me in that way.
Oh, I love that. This is going to be a good conversation. This is going to be a good conversation, even as we think about having like an audience or having people be like aware of you or your behavior, even before social media. That's great. So, of course, we want to set the context for today's conversation. We want all of our conversations to sort of be rooted in that. So, I want to start by saying, in doing my research, asterisk here, I didn't spend days on this research, but in doing my research, I was not able to find a ton of really substantive data around this intersection of social media and its impact on the culture of the workplace and how we work. You know, I found a ton of stats around how many people were using social media and how social media has amplified businesses and its impacts, but not really around like how it has shifted our culture. So, a couple things I do want to share. So, one, a large, this feels intuitive to me, but want to name it, a large majority of folks in the US are on social media. The statistic that I found, which was according to a site called SEO.ai, was 72.5% of Americans are on social media across 6.7 platforms. So I thought that was interesting because oftentimes when we talk about social networking sites or social media platforms, it feels like we're talking about just like a few. Facebook, it's definitely one of the more popular ones, including WhatsApp and Instagram. But when we talk about social media, folks also are including in that statistic things like LinkedIn. They're including internal sort of like workplace social sites like a Slack. So
Oh, interesting.
many folks are working across multiple sites. The statistic around how many folks are using social media for business was 28.7% of US folks are using social media for business, which was lower than the global average. I found it interesting that more folks in the UK are using social media than the US. I think this was a bias that I had. I just assumed like, oh, we started all this,
Me too.
so of
Yeah.
course, of course, we're number one. But that was not the case according to the data that I saw. The other thing I wanted to name before we started chatting about this is fairly new-ish when we think about sort of workplace culture. However, LinkedIn was one of the first, which is very interesting. LinkedIn was started the same year as MySpace in
Shut up.
2003.
Really?
Yes, really.
Wild.
So LinkedIn, they know what they're
The
doing. Shout
OG.
out
They the
the
OG.
OG. Yes. Which again, when we think about this intersection and how we work, the ways we're working, I mean, it's not lost on me that, you know, Karen and I are using social media, LinkedIn, as our sort of like platform for this work as well. The other thing I wanted to name around like who is using it, you know, oftentimes when we talk about social media, it feels like it skews younger. For sure it does. The statistic I found was 84% of 18 to 29-year-olds are on social media. However, 81% of 30 to 39-year-olds are on social media, and then 73% of 50 to 64-year-olds are on social media. So,
Okay.
for people under 64, it's a large majority.
Yeah.
And those are the people who are in the workplace. So, oftentimes it's like, oh, who's on their phone on social media? It's everyone, pretty
Everybody.
much. It is everyone. I wasn't able to sort of like pull out the data around like, education level or race or gender, things like that. But I would imagine when we think about professionals in the workplace, we're going to get upwards of, you know, close to 100%, like
Yeah.
a even larger majority, right?
Yeah.
Especially when we think about how people are accessing jobs, especially with like a LinkedIn, most people are applying for jobs through these sites as well. So
Mhm.
the engagement is definitely there. And the information I was able to find around like benefits and challenges, a lot of that was published by law firms, which I also found interesting because the framing was around sort of like risk or like the, you know, reward versus the risk. So I definitely am feeling like I would love to revisit this topic in the future for sure. So some of the benefits I think again are pretty intuitive. So elevated employee engagement. I saw a statistic that said, you know, employees that were engaged in social media, whether they were engaging with their employers, LinkedIn, or on X, or whatever the platform was, were more likely to stay at that organization for longer. They
Oh.
included some things like Slack, their engagement level on Slack, which again, that tracks, especially as we're thinking about how people enjoy learning or receiving content in 2025. There's an ability to sort of fortify connections, especially in affinity spaces.
Yep.
Mhm.
There's an
Yep.
opportunity to amplify your brand. And then, of course, share ideas. There was a lot of information around increased innovation connected to folks who were avid sort of social users. And then the challenges, because there are challenges, right?
Hmm.
Um, Challenges around confidentiality and really thinking about like breaches of proprietary information, thinking about how folks are sharing sort of like the secret sauce of things, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. It's like just people knowing, is that a breach, or do
What
they
do
have to
they?
sort of know how to do it? Um,
Wait, to that point, I remember something an employee like sharing the Chick-fil-A like mac and cheese recipe.
yeah, I mean,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
there's stuff like that. I mean, and just by sharing that, does that then expose the company to risk? Or like, are people going to, I think you need a little bit more than the recipe at this point, but maybe for a company of that size and not a small, I don't know, it can have varying impacts for sure. Um, while we talked about increased productivity and connection, there can be decreased productivity. Um, Again, I don't know the studies on this. I would imagine if someone is just uninterested in their work, it would not take just social media to distract them. But we have seen a ton of studies around just like the addictive nature of social media and things like that. So I can see a connection there as well.
Hmm.
Of course, reputational damage, especially when you think of things like, people going live during like confidential meetings and things like that. Sometimes legal and ethical concerns around who you're showing. Do you have permission to record
Mhm.
people or share their likeness? Sometimes conflicts of interest. If I am someone who is posting my personal beliefs and views in the social space, that can maybe not align with like my organization. Of course, bullying and harassment. We've seen, I don't know that I would call, yeah, people categorize bullying harassment as in, if I figure out where Karen works and then I start messaging her employer about things that I've seen Karen do, that can
Yeah.
be qualified as, bullying and harassment.
Yep.
And then, of course, how people might use or misuse social media in the hiring process. So there's a ton there.
Hmm.
A lot of context, good context for a great conversation, which I'm excited to dig into. So, of course, we want to kick it to you, Arnold, first. But actually, I'm gonna, before we kick it to you, Arnold, Karen, I know
Yes.
you've done some research on our esteemed guest
Oh
here.
man.
So I would love to hear from you before we ask you your first question, Arnold. I would love to hear from you. In looking at Arnold's social media, what were your sort of like perceptions of him and his work?
Yeah, so I had an opportunity to IG stalk you a little bit, Arnold,
Hmm.
and it's one of my favorite things to do sometimes, just as
Same. Same.
research.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I will say I was very heartened by your content. And honestly, some of it made me emotional, like in a
Mm,
positive way.
Mm.
Just seeing like the love and connection and like bond you have with your community of students and other like educators, the fun that you incorporate in the day. Like I was seeing a few videos where you played music and like some of the
mm,
old school music to see if like some of the kids knew who the artist was, which I think is also a really great way to like pass on tradition and like
mm.
here's what real music like
Oh,
sounds like
100%.
today.
Yes.
So I loved it. I loved all of it. It was really, I mean, to talk about like a timeline cleanse, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I feel like
Mm.
your content is.
Oh, I
Oh,
appreciate hearing that. Thank
you
you.
must have cash apped her, huh?
The check is in the mail, baby.
Yes, yes. Okay, so for our listeners, Arnold, why don't you tell us how you are using social media professionally, and then what are the things that feel good, and then what are the things that feel risky about what you post?
Yeah, it's funny. That question is even funny because it's not like I created my social media account thinking that it would be used in the way that it's used now. It was
Mm,
just a personal Instagram page that I had for me and the few friends that I knew from like high school, college, and like the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And it would I would just share things that I loved. You know what I'm saying? Pictures of and videos of friends and family, and sometimes work because I love the work that I'm in. Um, and then it kind of shifted because a couple of the things that I posted ended up kind of taking off and going viral a little bit and being reposted by other more popular blogs and news outlets. And so when the followers kind of increased, I felt the need to kind of shift and take my page away from a little bit away from like my personal thing and just kind of have it exclusively focus on the work, which I was happy to do.
mm,
But it turned basically exclusively into a site where I share my work, especially on the feed. Um, and the purpose of it is really just, I mean, Karen, what you saw is really like my hopes and dreams for what that page is. I want it to literally just be a timeline cleanse. And I say
yeah,
that because, I prayed about it. And to
Mm.
me, a lot of time, I know sometimes the algorithm is going to do what the algorithm does. But
yeah,
anytime I would see photos, videos of school, it was always negative. It was always a student being disrespectful to a teacher or a school fight or something about a shooting, God forbid, or a
Mm.
teacher complaining about the work. And
yeah,
that isn't my experience in the work. The vast majority of my experience in the work, and I'm talking over 90% of my day, of every day, is filled with like just joy, laughter, love. And there is a small percentage that's like challenging, but that's just life. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
Yeah.
so I felt like I kind of wanted to shift the narrative around what this work is, right? And so I just started posting, and it's not even hard to figure out what to post. It's just like more like, okay, which one of the 1,000 moments from today would I like to post to share with the world so that they can see what the real norm is? So I just started doing that. And to me, that feels the best. When I'm able to share something, the best part about it to me is when I'm able to share something and I see in the comments when it reminds someone of something that they experienced as a kid.
yeah,
So of
Mm.
a positive thing that they experienced as a kid. Even if it's like, oh, I wish I would have had this as a kid, I think that that's still a good thing because we can want better for our kids coming up behind us. So I think that that's the best part about it.
yeah.
Um, to the
I
second
would
part of,
love to.
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I would also love to know like how you balance like authenticity on your
Mhm.
page, and is that something that you balance, or do you feel like you're clear about your brand, you're clear about what you want to post, so the question around like authenticity and showing the challenge side versus the joy side and the balance in that, like how do you decide?
Yeah, and I love that question. And I don't, the framing of it is literally what I'm pushing against.
Okay.
So when you say authenticity, like when you say balance authenticity, I think that you're saying, do you share the other side? Do you share the challenge? I think if I share nothing but positivity, that is authentic. That is 100%
Mm,
authentic, right?
yeah,
And choosing not to center deficit doesn't make it any less authentic to me. It just
mm-hmm,
makes it more intentional. I think that when you share challenges, I'm very, I don't do that, and it's not because I don't want people to think that the work doesn't have challenges. It's just that why would I center that? Because now you're talking about sensitive information with a student, with their family, and I've worked really, really
Mm.
hard. We've worked really hard to build trust, especially when you're talking about posting it for hundreds of thousands of people.
yeah,
I've built trust with these families that they trust that I'm able to like post and make their kids and their community look good. I
yeah,
would never want to post in a way that makes people feel any kind of shame or regret.
yeah,
So I don't think that that makes it less authentic. I think that it's just like to me, that's the most authentic I can be, to center the thing that it is. The vast majority of it is what it is.
Yeah. I love that framing around like being a steward of also these experiences that you're sharing that are not only yours, but
Yeah,
that other people are having with you,
yeah,
and being feeling responsible for showing the best parts of that.
for sure. I think that, people say the social media is the highlight reel or whatever. And to your point, yes, I do think that it's important, especially because I have a lot of aspiring educators or even current
Mm-hmm.
educators who may follow me. And I want the work to resonate with them, and I don't want to be a reminder of hardship. Like, I don't want to have to remind people of how hard their day was. I want to remind them. Sometimes we have to be reminded, hey, the vast majority of this work is this. So if an educator had a bad day and they may come across a video on my feed and it resonates with them because they had moments like that too, it can kind of remind them and kind of refresh them as to what the work actually is. And it's not even just stifled or kept just to education. I think everybody went to school, so everybody can kind of relate to the content. So
Mm-hmm. Have you thought about like what risk feels like for you? Because, I think I am one of the social media users who feels like generally the things that I don't love about social media
mhm,
are the ways in which people absorb information as like law or truth and not like a part of context, right? So people will hear a 30-second clip and be like, oh, I understand everything about insert whatever,
right.
right? They'll, watch something on like growing food and be like, boom, I'm
Got
done
it.
with,
Yeah, yeah.
Wegmans and I'm really into farming.
Right.
So, I think the sort of thing I always think about is like, how do you think about risk and what is your responsibility online and to whom?
Yeah, I think that I always feel the weight of that responsibility because I don't feel like I am at the center of my content, right? I feel like our community, my community, the work is at the center of my content. So I feel a really, really deep and heavy burden to make sure that I'm presenting in a really intentional way. So because of that, anytime before I post a video, like if it includes a student, like specifically, I always reach out to their parent, like, hey, got this great video. I want to send it to you. Do you mind if I post this? Even
Mm-hmm.
though every student that comes into our building, they sign waivers before they come that we can like share on school-based social media platforms. But because mine has kind of taken off a little bit more, I always just give them that courtesy. And 100% of the time they said yes, but that's just part of the responsibility that I feel. And also, like, I know that people, to your point, they're going to make judgments about Black and brown children. They're going to make judgments
Yeah.
about my
Hmm.
school based on the content that I post. And I just don't want to give them a reason to be negative, if that makes any sense. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Especially because that's already right the stereo. We're so our bias is such that we go to the negative before we go to the positive. So
Yeah. Even the most positive video in the world, you look at the comments and someone is going to have something negative to say. And when it
Mm-hmm.
first took off, I was really nervous about that because I'm like, I'm not used to all these hundreds and thousands of people commenting. And so one of the first ones that really went viral, it was just a collection of one day I was walking through the hallway and I would see some kids and they would come up and give me a hug or dap me up or whatever. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of great. And so I posted it and it went viral. And in the comments, I saw some people, like most of it was really, really positive. But then you had that one comment like, man, I wish my daughter would run up and hug another man like that.
mm,
Right.
Mm.
And so it's like, and then someone will reply to that. And then the algorithm pushes that to the forefront,
Sure,
first thing
sure.
people
yeah.
see. And so I'm like, oh my God, are people going to frame this as something that it's not? And then I would start replying to each of the negative comments. But the more I replied to it, the more the algorithm pushed it to the forefront. People started seeing it. So I just kind of had to learn, like, you're always going to have some people who are going to be negative, even with the most innocent thing.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I have to be careful to like not let my good be evil spoken of. Like some things, even though it
Mm.
may be innocent, maybe I won't post that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How do you think about sort of the storytelling that you're doing? And from your perspective, who owns that storytelling? Is it like your school, their sort of like brand? Is it you? Is it the storytelling is really coming from the students? Or how do you think about, you know, what the rules are around that?
Yeah. I know it's certainly like I think that I am a big part of it because I'm the one who's like doing the actual posting, but there aren't necessarily my stories. So, you know, whatever video I'm posting, I think it belongs to the community. It belongs to the families. It belongs to the kids, even people who aren't seen. If I'm showing a kid and their accomplishment in the classroom or the joy they have coming to school, you're looking at a moment, but there are so many contributors and stakeholders that fed into that moment. We don't necessarily see the hug they got at the car, or I'm saying the special trip to Dunkin' to get their favorite tea cup of tea before they came to school that contributed to the smile on their face. But when their parents see that video, they know, what I'm saying? So it brings a smile to their face knowing that they contributed to this moment where they see their kid when they're not with them smiling. So I think the stories belong to the community at large, which is why I'm so intentional in making sure that we center the positive.
Mm,
I love that.
Yeah.
I would love to. So, in honor of your kind of framing, you talked about also how social media is relatively new, right? Within the last 20, 30 years.
Hmm.
And I think with one of the things I think about a lot is with the invention of social media, now essentially everybody has a platform and everybody has a brand. And, you can put something in your bio and all of a sudden you are
You're that.
that thing
You're that.
yes.
without like having to go to school, without having to get no credential. And so I'm curious, Arnold, what you think about this concept of like everybody having a brand, and especially as an educator, like how did you figure out what your brand was?
um, I think that everybody having a brand existed before social media.
Mm,
Um, but I think that now it's just like amplified, whatever. Like you are who you are, right? And I think sometimes, to your point, people can fake and put things and they think that they're that. Um, but they were faking before social media. They fake in real life. You know what I'm saying? Just who they can get away with
That's
it
true.
with.
Yeah.
hmm
But I think your brand, like to me, this work found me. And so the way that I approach this work is because I don't necessarily have this big deficit story, right? I don't have this story like, oh, I was just so down and out as a kid and my mom left me and my dad was on. I don't have that story. Like, I really think that the vast majority of my life, I've really been blessed and I've been the recipient of a whole lot of love. And so I try to
Hmm.
live my life to like reciprocate that. Like, I owe much more than I'm able to give, right?
Yeah.
And so when I come to work every day, I know that I'm coming to get to pay. Like I owe. So because of that, I want to be able to like display that. I think all of us should have that mindset. That's not like specific to me. Like all of us have really been given a lot more than we're able to give. And so I think that we need to make sure that we're like paying that forward and displaying that. So the brand kind of found me, I think.
But I want to push back a little bit because I do think social media has really elevated or accelerated the idea of sort of like entrepreneurship, or
Mm,
maybe if you were not sort of interested in like a side hustle or a personal brand, you just wanted to go to your job and mind your business. I think social media has incentivized and created a lot more reason for folks to have that. Even thinking about LinkedIn as a social media, it's like, can I get a job if I'm not on social media? Like,
mm.
can I, So I do think social media has created a space where people are very, like, much more conscious of like holistically their brand versus like, I can just show up to my job and people will know me for my work rather than like this idea of a brand.
That's true.
And even in the education space, it's like, how do you sort of balance that? Like, I think you could very easily, make the similar to like Ron Clark Academy, you could be the
Hmm.
Arnold Ford Academy of Love. And like,
Hmm.
how do you sort of balance like personal ambition, because there is a lot of power you're given when you start
Hmm.
to get followers and all of those things. I mean, you don't have to reveal if you have plans in the
Hmm.
work, but
Hmm.
like,
We
how do
won't
you
take
sort of
it.
Right.
We'll take an exclusive.
Right. Sure. And we want to drop that here live on the Don't Do That podcast. But like, how do you balance sort of like personal ambition and how this can personally benefit you versus like, I simply want to like bring attention to, this work that I'm doing?
So I'll tell you in this way. So when things first popped off, it kind of goes in waves. So when things first popped off, I mean, I didn't even know that there was a such thing as message requests. Like I just look at the top and I see the number of DMs I have and I go there. But there's a whole other section of message requests from people who don't follow you or you don't follow,
Yeah.
rather. And like you have to go into that folder to see. I knew nothing about it. So it had been weeks and weeks and things had started to skyrocket. I had like 100,000 followers and I didn't know. And then someone told me, they like popped up to the school and they said, I've been trying to get in contact. It was this reporter. Said, I sent you a message. I said, I didn't get it. I looked in the request and it was thousands of like messages. And many of them were from brands that wanted to partner with me. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I would go live every morning and I just so happened to have a cup of a certain kind of tea in my hand. And that particular company reached out and said, hey, I slid you 2 tickets to the Roots picnic. And hey, we want to partner
Oh
with you.
yeah.
And here's what it's going to look like. Hey, every morning you just show that particular cup and you tag us in the post, and then we'll collaborate and we can pay you X amount. And then, other companies like crayon companies and, school clothing companies reached out and said, hey, let's partner.
Hmm.
And I politely declined them because I didn't want the platform to turn into that. And maybe in the future I'll think about it, but I didn't want it to turn into something that felt too much like I'm an influencer trying to sell you on something that's going to profit or benefit me personally. Now,
Hmm.
with that being said, there have been opportunities like speaking engagements that I've gotten just because people say,
Sure.
hey, do you want to come and speak? Absolutely. And they're going to pay me, of course, right? But just in terms of like what I actually post, I didn't necessarily want to take advantage of that, so I balanced it in that way. If you want me to invite me to your conference, I'm there. You want to fly me to Nashville to speak and give a keynote, I'd love to. But if you want me to promote, these crayon boxes and put a couple of my that's not what it's for. You know what I mean?
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a good balance. Karen, any final questions before we head into our do that or don't do that segment?
Wait, well, before you go, Karen, can I ask, like, at your when you were setting the context, Ani,
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about there's not a lot of data around how social media influences culture.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent do you think it influences culture? Like we had this conversation before around like art. Does art imitate life or does life imitate art, right? And
Yep.
my like, does it or to what extent does social media influence culture, like in your minds? Because I think it does rather significantly, but
Oh, I think it does rather
Yeah.
significantly as
yeah.
well. Karen, you want to go first?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that to me, it's integrated now. Like, I don't know that there's a way that you could separate social media from culture. I think it's the vehicle that we spread culture now, honestly.
Mm,
Um, what I do think, what I find interesting is like the generational use of social media. As millennials, we have the opportunity to like opt in and to adopt the using social media, whereas younger generations is just a part of their life. And so I think there is a difference in our approach in terms of knowing that this is a tool that didn't always exist and we can use it how we see fit versus this is something that I have to use, right, in order to fit in.
yeah.
And so for me, I think that's where it gets blurry. And I'm honestly grateful that I didn't have to grow up like in my
Yeah.
younger years with social
Mm-hmm.
media. I can have an awkward phase without anybody really seeing it, without any receipts coming up 20 years later about it.
Yeah.
But I think that it definitely is a part of culture now in a way that we can't undo.
Mm,
Yeah. I mean, I think the things that come up for me that make me pause and think are one, like I think it has created an aversion towards risk for good reason that I think inhibits like growth in some ways. Like I think a part of like being able to grow and evolve and expand your sort of like aperture for your how you grow your values is connected to risk taking, which means making a mistake or saying the wrong thing.
Hmm.
And I think social media has created a space where it is very risky for individuals, for organizations to take risks. So
Yeah.
that is a concern for me. The other thing that feels like concerning for me, or just like I'm thinking about, is how we assess culture and how people will use today's sort of like cultural lens to assess, things from 10,
Correct.
15, 20 years ago.
Correct.
And it's even easier to do that when things are
It's
recorded,
received.
right?
Yeah.
So I can, from my memory, say, oh, what we did in 1991 was crazy. But if I can pull up the image of what we did in 1991,
Right.
it is even crazier. And
Right.
there's something about that that I don't love for the human experience.
Mhm.
And even thinking about like the workplace of like, I hate that people, the idea of like branding is like, I can be many things. I can be virtue and vice. That is on my social media, that I can be very like about it, with it, and sometimes problematic too. And I think that is like a human experience. And I hate that we have to like have it together in that way. So those are my concerns.
Yeah. I agree with both of you. I do think that social media is the vehicle whereby we share culture. Also, think that it's a passenger in the seat of that
Mm-hmm.
vehicle.
Hmm.
I think that we have to intentionally be the drivers of said vehicle.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think it can kind of like get out of control. It reminds me of, and I'll share this before we get to that end. And I feel comfortable sharing this particular part because I've been called into the office many times, not because things are wrong, but just because as things kind of climbed, HR was like, "Hey, come in, let's chat about like how you're using this platform."
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
and so this one particular time, um, I was going live in a particular classroom as students were working, and the work that they were doing was brilliant. And I wanted to make sure I showcased that because, again, intentionality. I don't want to just show a bunch of black and brown kids dancing, and we never show like the work that's going on in the classroom, right? So I was showing their work, and one of the comments that I got was, "Hey, let's be careful sharing because some of the curriculum resources that were like specific to our organization were like
Mm.
kind of being shown." And they were saying, okay, so we got to be careful showing that because this is something that's just for our organization, blah, blah, blah. So my initial thought was like, it's so hard to mix activism with capitalism because it's a
Mm.
capitalist
Hmm.
mindset when you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
hey, don't show this to that other school that also services black and brown kids because we don't want
Yeah.
them to see this because it's helping our scores. And my thing
Mm-hmm.
is, well, if it's helping our kids, why would we keep it just to ourselves? Like you can't combine the two. And so we kind of
Mm-hmm.
had a dialogue about that. Um, but again, I get the kind of like risk side of it, especially when we're talking about materials that like we may have developed or created. But again, that's sort of the tension that I kind of deal with even as I post joy. Like you would
Yeah.
think if you want to post joy, just post it. But I'm always
Yeah.
careful
Mm-hmm.
because I'm like, man, I don't want this to be a site where just you just see black and brown kids dancing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you got to show
Yeah.
some, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't want it to be that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
even monetizing joy, like you talked about, right?
right,
Like,
right,
let me
right,
monetize this
Like,
joy.
and then here, please buy. Thanks for
right,
enjoying my
right.
video. If you too would like to feel joy in your life, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's wild times out here. Okay, that's a great segue into do that or don't do that. Um, so my do that, don't do that for both of you is in the workplace specifically, using social media as a tool for accountability. So, as an example, like your president or CEO says something crazy in a meeting and you post about it to say, like, this is so inappropriate. I think this CEO should be fired, or try to hold them publicly accountable. Are we doing that or not doing
Question: we're still employed by this particular company with said CEO.
that? Yes, that's why you're in the room.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do for
Okay.
me. Don't do that. I mean, again, like because Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Don't do that. You're still employed by this particular company. If you have certain views, you're not going to put that on a social platform that can be shared and reshared. Um, don't do that. Definitely for me.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that, again, taking the long term view, because I do think that social media is very short sighted. And
Hmm.
I'm the
Hmm.
type that, like, I don't want to burn bridges. And you
Hmm.
never know, like, when you may need a referral, not maybe from that particular person, but if you're
Hmm.
damaging the brand of the whole company,
Hmm.
then you could be shooting yourself in the foot, you know,
Yeah.
Agreed.
later on. So I agree.
Agreed.
Don't do that.
Yeah, I agree. Don't do that. But for me, the don't do that is connected to process, which is like, as someone who is a leader, I don't want accountability to look like that for me. Like,
Ooh,
I think
that's
like the
good.
first step of that is like a conversation, a connection, an internal thing. So like the quickness to say like, I see that you have made an error and I'm going to like move quickly to like public accountability,
Right.
like feels like I don't want to live in that
Yeah, we skipped a couple
space.
steps. Yeah.
I don't want to live in that space. So
Yeah. That's fair.
That's a good one. Okay, Arnold and Ani, my do that or don't do that. Should you let your coworkers and bosses and managers and supervisors follow you on social media? Do that or don't do that.
uh, Anna, you can go first.
I think I generally have a rule that if I don't give you a hug at work, if you're not like the hug type of coworker, I feel comfortable with you in like my personal space, then we're not going to do a lot of personal things together. So
Hmm.
I'm not going to personally talk about my children, my family, my, if you're just like, hey, good to see you. It's like, no, we're not going to be social media friends. And I'm very discerning about the hugs. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm very much on the opposite end of that.
sure. That's right. As a micro influencer.
I got so, but I'll say this. I'll say this. Prior to things kind of taking off, my Instagram was private for a while, and it really was. The only reason I had it private is because I work with children. I was working in the middle school and the high school, and I didn't want my students following me because again, it was personal.
Yeah.
But now it's open, it's public. I have a very different stance, but I also post very different things. And I've considered like starting a separate personal Instagram that I would not want people who I work with to follow me on. I think that
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be a healthy separation there. So I agree with Ani, but in my particular case, you know, the doors of the church are now open. You know what I'm saying?
Come on, Saints.
Yeah.
Come on through, Saints.
Now the way I get around it, I do a little close friends. You know what I'm saying, for the people
Sure,
that actually
sure.
know. We get the real in there, but yeah.
Okay. Maybe let's do one more each, Karen.
Okay, cool.
Um, okay, my do that or don't do that. You go first. You go first.
Okay. Mine, do that or don't do that. Clap back in the comments.
We're going to be opposite here.
So, are you sure? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if we will. Um, Here's the thing: clapback, not necessarily, but delete and block for sure.
Okay.
Because of the content that I post, if someone
Hmm.
and I've done it, people are going to have. There's no way that I can monitor, all of the comments. Like I would just sit on my phone all day. But if I do see something that shines a negative light on community or God forbid a kid, I'll delete the comment and block the person quickly. But to me, like clapping back in the comment section is only going to give life to whatever they said. So unless
Yeah.
I want to highlight what they said so that people can see my point of view, then
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to clap back. For example, when a lot of comments say, "Oh my God, I love that you show these kids love." That's probably the only hug they're going to get all day. I'll clap back at that just to kind of shape the narrative like, no, why would you think that? They get a lot of hugs. This is just another one. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But clap back just because, I didn't like something somebody said. Nah, we just delete the comment if it's that serious.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna be honest, y'all. I only started reading comments like a year ago. I didn't even know so many people were in comments. It was
Oh
like
wow.
shocking to me
Uh-huh.
to hear that people not only look at comments but actually comment themselves.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I
Yes.
I am shocked at the level of engagement that happens to this day.
In the
Shocked.
comments.
Like I'll see someone post and it's like hundreds of commenters. I'm like, really? People felt the urge
To
to
comment.
write a statement underneath someone's to
Yeah.
share publicly. It's just a bizarre thing for me that maybe I'm showing
Okay.
my age.
I think
It's
so.
very
Yo,
very challenging for
that
me
is
to
so.
understand that concept that I wanted to publicly share my personal thought about this thing. It's
Oh,
just
that's where
wild.
the action is, baby.
Right. I
Comments.
was
I
about to
know
say
it's shocking to me,
Oh
y'all.
yeah.
Shocking.
the comments
Um,
are the best part sometimes. The comments make
so
it
Absolutely.
I've
better than the
heard.
post.
I disagree, but I've heard this as well. Okay, so last one here, and then we'll kick it to you. Oh, and then we'll sort of share our key takeaways. So, using social media as a sort of filter when you're interviewing folks. So, if you're interviewing someone, is it do that? You should look at their social media, get a sense of like who they are, if you will, or don't do that.
I can go first on this one as someone who is actively at the head of our search committee for hiring new teachers or staff members, what have you. Um, Over the past 7, 8 years that I've been at this particular school, we've never had a candidate come through that I haven't at least searched to try to see if they have a social media presence. Every single
Hmm.
time I search. And I've never made a decision based on that. It
Mm-hmm.
informs my decision, but I've never made a decision based on their social media profile. A lot of times it's just, similar to looking at a part of a resume. This is your digital footprint. And if it's public, this is what you want people to see. So that's going to inform, to me, a part of who you are. And I don't want to go into it. It feels almost like negligence if it's out there and I don't at least consider it. That's my
Hmm.
take.
Oh, I like that. So I think the nuance I would put, I don't disagree with you, Arnold, but I would add some nuance. One, I think it's important to be intentional about at what point in the process you are reviewing folks' social media, because if it is before an interview, then I think that that will color your experience
For sure.
and will introduce more bias into that interview process, which could be unfair to the candidate depending on their other qualifications. So I think being intentional about what point you review that is important. And I also think that if there, let's say there's a great candidate and there's some content on their social media that gives you pause or could be problematic, one, if they're not in the running for like actually being hired,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that's feedback you can offer to the person so that they're aware, right? Like this opportunity didn't come through because of X, Y, and Z things.
Mm.
And I also think that there is opportunity to think about where not grace comes in, but just understanding like, here's our stance or our company policy on social media. If you're interested in being a part and, accepting this role, here are some decisions that you will have to make as it
Mm-hmm.
relates to your content. So,
That's fair.
Hmm.
yeah.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a good way to wrap up, y'all. We're gonna share some final thoughts and key takeaways. Any calls to action? Karen, I'm gonna pass the mic to you first. What are your final thoughts and takeaways for our listeners around social media in the workplace?
My final thought is really just to be intentional. I think everything that you shared, Arnold, to me lifts up that mantra
Mm-hmm.
that social media ultimately is a tool. And when we combine it with the workplace, you have to decide how much risk or how little risk you want to take on. So just be intentional about how you use it, what you're saying, what you're posting, because your employers are paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Arnold, any final takeaways from you?
Yeah, I echo what Karen said, obviously, and also, um, just with social media as it is with life, it's okay to not center deficit. It's
Hmm.
okay to put the joy of your life in the middle of how you tell your story, because I think the way that you tell your story impacts on how your story is told by other people, and it impacts how you live out the rest of it. So if I'm telling you about my day and I put the best parts of my day in the middle of the story, then I feel different. My body feels different. So if I'm constantly telling my story, not to say that deficit or challenge doesn't happen, but I'm not putting that in the middle, I think that it
Mm.
impacts how other people look at you and how other people look at the space that you're in.
Power of the tongue.
Correct, correct.
Love
Yes.
that. For me, the takeaways are really thinking about as employers. I hope more employers are having these conversations
Mhm,
instead of sort of living in this space of like there is social media and then there is work. I
mhm,
think we should really be thinking about the impacts and overlaps and intersections of how social media can influence how people are working. And also thinking about how it can be, to your point of power of the tongue, be used in like a really positive way
yeah.
to really help like leverage employee engagement and things like that. And then, of course, my risk averse personality, I could not let us lead this conversation without saying like not everything is for online as well. You don't
Correct.
have to think about your full holistic brand and be posting every parts and aspect of your life. There can be things that are just not for the internet and just for your
Mhm.
friends. So
That's right.
I hope
Right.
people know that too.
Agreed, agreed.
I love it. Well, thank you, Arnold, so much for joining us on this episode. Tell folks where they can actually find you on social media just in case they want to get connected.
Sure. First of all, thank you both for having me. I had a ball. I'm having this conversation. It's actually lifted up some things that I want to continue to think about. Folks can find me on Instagram at Uncle Arnold, Uncle spelled with a K, and Arnold, yeah, Uncle Arnold on Instagram.
Awesome. Y'all be sure to follow Arnold on social media and soak up some of that joy that he's posting. We want to thank you all for listening and just remind you that if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review. It helps to boost our engagement. Share this episode with a peer or colleague that you think would be interested. And if you'd like to reach Ani and I directly, feel free to email us at the don't do that pod at gmail.com. And until next time, remember,
Don't
don't
do
do
that.
that.